Hello, everyone. This is your video instructions for how to do the TPCAST poetry analysis. So, unlike the PQP, the praise, question, polish strategy, the TPCAST is much more in depth. It is much more analytical, and I would say it's much more academic. So, this type of poetry analysis would be, I would suggest, for those of you who are ready for something a little more challenging, and also for anybody who is planning on maybe taking an AP English class. So, as sophomores, you can take a pre AP English class, which will get you ready for AP language and composition as a junior or AP literature as a senior. Or if you're planning on taking a pre AP English class as a sophomore in order to prepare you for running start for the English classes you would have to take at a college level. I would suggest you use this strategy to help you analyze poetry because, like I said, it's much more in depth. It goes a lot deeper and it will prepare you for the types of academic analysis that you have to do at that higher level, at an AP level or at a college level. So, with poetry analysis, again, whether it's the PQP or the TPCast, it's not about the right answer so much as you being able to pull out the evidence from the poem to support your analysis. That's really what we're looking for. Okay. So, TPCast in your reader's notebook, I would write this out just like you see here because each of the letters in the TPCast stands for a particular step that you're going to be doing and how you're going to be analyzing and looking at the poem. So, you might want to write this like you see here, and then each of these letters stands for one of the steps. So the first step in TPCast, the first T stands for title. So you want to read the title first and predict what you think the poem is going to be about just based on the title. So you would just write maybe a sentence or two about what you think it's going to be about because after you've gone through most of the analysis, you're actually going to come back to your prediction to determine if your prediction was correct and also to determine what has changed in your own thinking from where you started. Now you want to read the poem. So, yeah, you're just going to read the title, write down your prediction before you read the poem at all. And just as you would with the PQP, with poetry especially, read through the poem twice and, if possible, listen to a recitation. With the advent of YouTube, there are a lot of poets who are now reading their work, especially if they're modern poets. Some of the poetry that we're going to do, it's a little older, so we're not going to have the poet reciting their poem because they've long since passed away. There may be others, especially teachers, will do a lot of poem recitations. But whenever possible, try to read through the poem two, maybe three times, or read through it twice and then listen to it. So that would be your third time. Okay, next step is paraphrasing, which is what the P stands for. Paraphrase just means putting something into your own words. So after you've read through the poem, rewrite it in your own words. Maybe some people like to go stanza by stanza. A stanza is basically a paragraph in poetry format. So if it's a four-line stanza, it's a quatrain, then you could paraphrase what those four lines are in one sentence. Some people like to be much more methodical and go line by line. You can certainly do that if you want. But sometimes paraphrasing a line doesn't really change it much from what the poet's written. So that's why I'm suggesting maybe stanza by stanza. Read a stanza and then put into your own words. So sometimes your paraphrase might be three sentences if it's, three paragraph or three stanzas, or it might be an entire page. It really depends on how long the poem is and how in depth you want your paraphrase to be. The next step, C, in the TPCAST, stands for connotation. Connotation goes beyond the literal definition of the words into the hidden meanings. It goes into those meanings that go beyond the literal. So, this is where you're going to look at figurative language. And you can see some of those terms right here. For example, simile, metaphor, hyperbole, personification. Those are all terms you know from literary devices. You also use them in poetry as well. Another thing is sometimes words have multiple meanings. So you've got the meaning that is most commonly known, but what are some of those secondary meanings? Because those secondary meanings can also add to your analysis of the poem. Another one is looking at the format or stanza form, as you see here. Sometimes when you see a poem, especially if there's weird spacing between words, that's done on purpose. The poet has done it for a reason. Why? Why would the poet separate words in a line? Why would the poet move words around the paper? Those of you that did the poetry analysis for the poem Needles in our last Zoom meeting, there was a purpose for where the poet had placed the words on the page. So you have to ask yourself, why is it written this way? What is the poet trying to say through this format? And then you've also got sound devices. And poetry is very much about listening and the music that comes through the words that are chosen. It is not a surprise that music is basically lyric poetry set to instrumentation. So, listening to the rhythm of the poem, what's the beat or what's called the meter? Also, the rhymes that you've got rhymes and rhyme scheme. Sometimes there's also alliteration, assonance, and consonants. Those are particular sound devices that create a particular musicality to the poem. So all of these things, C for connotation, that step is huge because there's so much to look for, but at the same time, there is no guarantee that all of this will be there. Okay, so that's another thing you have to be aware of when you're looking at a poem and you say, Mrs. Goucher, I'm looking, I cannot find a simile. Well, there might not be a simile. So it's about understanding the figurative language, those sound devices, and looking for them. But if you don't find them, moving on because they're not all going to be in every single poem. A in the TP cast is for attitude, or in this case, tone. So, tone is the attitude of the speaker towards the subject of the poem. The speaker is not always the poet. Sometimes the poet kind of creates a character who is then reciting this or speaking this poem. Doesn't necessarily reflect what the poet believes or feels, but it does reflect what the speaker believes or feels. So, one way to look for tone is to start by asking, is the emotional feeling that I get from this poem, is it positive? Is it negative? Or is it neutral? If it's positive, then you want to identify or name that positive feeling. So, is it joy? Is it excitement? Is it curiosity? Is it happiness? What's the difference between happiness and joy? Um, so, you want to identify what that positive feeling is. If it's negative, again, you want to identify or name that negative feeling. Is it anger? Is it jealousy? Is it envy? Is it hatred? So, really try to hone in on what that negative feeling is. Or if it's neutral, Can you identify that neutral feeling? Is it peace? Is it calm? Is it numb? Okay, so really try to hone in on that. Along with tone, you also have mood, which is not listed here, but mood is your attitude or your feeling towards the poem. So you do the same thing with mood. How do I feel about this poem? Do I feel positive? Do I feel negative? Or is there no feelings? Or it's kind of a balance between the two. And then go deeper and really identify what that emotional feeling is for you. S in the TP cast stands for shift. Well, what is a shift? Think about the definition of shift. It's a change, it's kind of a pivot. You were walking in one direction and then you turned and started walking in a different direction. So, shifts in poems, a lot of times, is the poet kind of sending up a red flag and saying, hey, pay attention. This is important. Something's about to happen here. It can change in time. So if the poet's writing about something in the past and then it changes to the present, that's a shift. Sometimes it's a shift in tone. It's a very positive feeling. You're getting lots of warm, fuzzy feelings, and then it turns negative. Whoa, why did it turn negative? What happened when it turned negative? Or sometimes it's a shift in the speaker, especially if it's a dramatic poem, because dramatic poems are poems that show action, they're being acted out. So, is there a shift in the speaker? Is there a different speaker, a second speaker who is now included? So you really want to pay attention to those shifts, those changes, because a lot of times, again, that is a clue to us, the reader, that something is happening. And a lot of times, whatever is happening, it affects the theme or it affects the message that the poet has for us. Okay, TP Cast has 3 T's in it. The T at the is your first step, which is to predict what you think the poem's gonna be about based on the title. The second T is title again, because you're gonna go back and you're gonna look at that prediction, and based on everything that you have noticed, compare your prediction to what you think about the poem now or what you think about that title. What new understanding, what epiphanies? Aha! Wait a minute. I thought this word was referring to this, but now that I've gone through all these steps, I realize it actually refers to something else. Okay. So, what other meanings might this title have now that you've paraphrased it? You've looked at the connotations, you've looked at the figurative language, the sound devices, the rhythm, the rhyme, all of that. And the attitude, the emotional feeling you're getting from both the speaker and from yourself. And the shifts too. Don't forget that one. And then the last T stands for theme. We're always in everything going to look for a theme. What is the message? So the theme of a poem may be understood as an interpretation of life. Theme is not just about that poem, it is a much larger message about society, it's about the human condition, human nature, people in general. So you want to look at, again, the tone. You want to look at the formatting, how it's placed on the page. Look at the language, figurative language, the literal language, the diction, the words that the poet chooses. All of those things work together to help us identify what is the message that the poet has for the readers. So, how do you find theme? You want to look at everything in the TP cast. All of those things are going to help you find the theme. What message what message are all of those parts working together to convey? What do you see in your paraphrase, in your connotations, in the attitude, in the shifts? How does that all work together to create or reveal the message. And what do you think the poet is saying about life? Remember, again, theme is never about that one particular poem. Theme is about life in general and how we as humans interact in this life. So, for those of you up for the challenge, I'm really excited to see what you can come up with using the TPCAST strategy.